I've always loved the quiet of the early morning. Being a morning person, I savor my coffee and dive into newspaper puzzles. Since childhood, problem solving has captivated me, so it's no shock that I ended up in a career breaking complex codes and fighting computer threats. The work is hard, but nothing compares to the thrill of solving a puzzle others can't crack. In my job, certainty is rare. One moment I'm enjoying a Sudoku, the next I'm thrown into a crisis. My team is used to sudden calls and changes. It's part of national security work. Still, some events can completely upend your life. On December 26th, I was sipping coffee and working on a Sudoku when my phone rang. I always solve one puzzle in the morning to wake up my brain. In many ways, puzzles are more than a hobby. They're my job. My team analyzes suspicious computer codes, traces their origins, and counters potential threats. It's perfect for a problem solver like me. The caller ID showed my boss's number. I sighed. A call during Christmas break was the last thing I wanted. But when the boss calls, you answer. "I need you in the office now, Thomas," he said, skipping pleasantries. "Seriously? It's the day after Christmas," I protested. "It's national security. Get moving." I scribbled a note for my wife, Ginny, grabbed my coat, and drove to NSA headquarters, wondering what could be so urgent. Recently, I had been working on a strange piece of code, a worm that seemed harmless. It didn't respond to our usual tests, making it even more intriguing. Maybe this emergency was related to that. When I arrived, I was directed to my boss's office, which was unusual. He was talking quietly with the director. Something was off. My boss turned to me and said, "Thomas, I have difficult news. Your wife is having an affair." I was stunned. "No, that's not true," I shouted. The director added, "We have a recording." He played it, and Ginny's voice filled the room, unmistakably talking to another man. My world collapsed. "Turn it off," I yelled, unable to bear it. Hearing my wife speak like that was devastating. Listening to it in front of my boss made it even worse. My boss looked concerned as he asked, "Are you okay, Thomas?" "No," I whispered, trying to process everything. Then anger surged through me. "Were you tapping my wife's calls? You had no right," the director responded calmly. "It's not that simple. We weren't surveilling Ginny. The system flagged her partner's voice. He's on our terror watch list." I stared in disbelief. "Ginny isn't a terrorist?" "We don't believe she's involved," the director explained. "We think he targeted her." Relief mixed with confusion. I struggled to understand. Why did she fall for him? I pushed aside my emotions to focus. Why would a terror group target Ginny? "They want to get to you, Thomas," my boss said quietly. "Me? Why?" I asked, shocked. "We suspect they're after NSA information. You're the link." I slumped into a chair, feeling lost. The director leaned forward, his voice serious. "Can you face Ginny tonight and pretend none of this happened?" "Not a chance," I replied, resolute. He nodded. "We're sending you out of town until we figure out what's going on." Frustration boiled up again. "Why not arrest him?" I demanded. "Emir has disappeared," the director said grimly. "His phone is off, and he's not at his apartment." My anger shifted to concern. Is Ginny in danger? "We don't think so," he assured me. She was just a means to an end. Reluctantly, I headed home, packed a bag, and left a note for Ginny. I slipped my wedding ring into my pocket. The bond shattered when I heard that recording. On the flight, I tried to distract myself with a Sudoku puzzle, but couldn't focus. I kept touching the ring in my pocket, wishing I could go back to before this mess. At Nashville Airport, an FBI agent named Henry picked me up for the drive to Oak Ridge. The 150-mile drive was mostly silent. We passed a power plant, and he pointed out its importance to NSA operations. When we arrived at Oak Ridge National Lab, I toured the facilities and proposed using their computing power to identify malware authors by coding style, similar to how linguists analyze text. The head techie got excited about the idea, and I felt a spark of hope amidst the chaos. That evening, Henry took me to a local restaurant. Back at the motel, I found a voicemail from Ginny, irritated by my sudden trip. Her voice sounded normal, but all I could hear was her tone from the recording. Memories of our life together flooded my mind. I recalled how Ginny once furiously condemned a friend's cheating husband, which had reassured me she'd never cheat. "What a fool I was," I muttered. "What a hypocrite she is." The next day, I toured another part of the Oak Ridge complex. The visit felt pointless, but I understood they wanted me out of the way for now. By noon, I asked Henry if we could leave, and to my surprise, he agreed. We headed to a local diner for lunch. Over lunch, I asked if there was anything interesting nearby. "Sure," Henry said. "There's some beautiful country if you're willing to get off the main roads." Anything was better than more wandering, so I agreed. We headed northwest to Frozen Head State Park. Curious about the name, I asked Henry, and he explained it came from the park's main peak, often snow-covered in winter. The highway turned into winding roads as we entered the park near Petros. As we climbed the mountain, the views were stunning, with clear vistas due to the lack of foliage. Henry pointed out every overlook, but he was so distracted that he didn't notice an approaching SUV until it slammed into us. "Son of a—" Henry yelled, trying to steer clear. The SUV hit us again, forcing us off the road. Henry struggled to regain control, but the car flipped and rolled. When we finally stopped, we were upside down. I hung by my seatbelt, watching the SUV back up and turn around. "He's coming back!" I shouted. Henry reached for his weapon. Just as the SUV sped toward us, a second car appeared, heading straight for it. The SUV swerved at the last second, lost control, and rolled down the ravine. There was a crash as it hit rocks and trees. The second car screeched to a halt, and a woman jumped out, running toward us. She wore jeans, a leather jacket, and had short, slicked-back hair, holding a combat knife. Now she's coming for us, I thought, struggling with my seatbelt. She reached Henry first, cut him loose, and then moved to me. "Grab onto something," she ordered. I did, but still landed awkwardly when she cut me free. She started to pull me out, but stopped suddenly. I saw Henry running down toward the wrecked SUV. "No! Come back!" she yelled. "Get away from there!" Then, a voice from the ravine shouted something like, "Los Angeles!" followed by a deafening explosion. The blast knocked the woman to the ground. I rushed over to help her up. "What was that?" I asked. "They call it a martyr's vest," she said grimly. "They're using them now." I remembered Henry. "Henry!" I shouted and started toward the ravine, but she grabbed my arm. "Unless you have combat experience, you don't want to see that. He's gone," she said, pulling me back. "What about Henry?" I asked. "I need to report this." "We need to leave now," she snapped. "There might be a second team." "Who sent them?" I asked, buckling my seatbelt. "It doesn't matter. They want you dead, and my job is to stop that." I glanced back, noticing something red on the windshield. She turned on the wipers, clearing it. That was Henry, I realized, feeling sick. It hit me that she and Henry had been working together. "I'm sorry about your partner." "What partner?" she replied, confused. "I'm not with the FBI. Now I was really lost." "Then who are you with?" "Mossad," she answered, eyes on the road. "The Israeli intelligence agency? What does Mossad want with me?" "Right now we're trying to keep you alive," she said, steering onto the interstate. "I appreciate you saving my life, but I don't even know your name." She glanced over with a hint of a smile. "Esther Freeman. Nice to meet you, Thomas Selfridge." As we drove east, confusion and questions filled my mind. Why are terrorists after me? And why is Mossad involved? She shot me a look. "Why do you think they were waiting for you?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "I was ordered here, but I don't know why they want me dead." "You don't have to play coy. I know why your boss sent you here." "You know about Ginny and Ymir?" I asked, stunned. She nodded. "We've been aware of their affair for a while. I've heard the recordings. It's bad enough she cheated, but now everyone knows," I muttered. "That's not why you were ambushed," she continued. "They used you as bait to lure Ymir away from Fort Meade. They didn't know his plan and wanted him far from the NSA. They hoped Henry could handle it, but he got careless." "They used me as bait?" I fumed. Then I noticed we passed the Oak Ridge exit. "Aren't we supposed to turn off there?" I asked. "Not anymore. We're heading back to Fort Meade," she said. "We're driving all the way to Washington?" I asked in disbelief. She simply nodded. As we cleared Knoxville's traffic, I couldn't hold back my questions. Why has Mossad been following me? And why is Ymir after me? Was that Ymir who blew himself up with Henry? "No," she replied. "That was his brother Hassan. But Ymir is the one we're after. We need him alive." "So who is Ymir, and why is he targeting me?" I pressed. She hesitated. "That might be partly our fault. The computer virus you've been analyzing, we sent it to the NSA." "How do you know about that?" I asked. "We intercepted it in Tel Aviv. We believe it's aimed at Israel. It's called Al-Andalus." "What's Al-Andalus?" I asked. "It's from history. Some groups want to reclaim land from the Middle Ages. This virus is their first step. They targeted you because you're the one who could crack it." I sat back, trying to process everything. I was about to ask more when she suddenly took an exit toward Johnson City. "Where are we going?" I asked. She turned off the engine and rested her head on the seat. "I can't go any farther," she said, then passed out. I panicked, rushing around to the driver's side. That's when I noticed a tear in her jacket's shoulder, soaked with blood. I helped her to the back seat and drove to a nearby motel. I paid cash for a room and returned to find her sitting up. She nodded at the room key, making me feel a bit better. Once inside, I carefully removed her jacket, revealing a deep wound. "I need you to find a pharmacy," she instructed. I grabbed the car keys and bought the supplies. When I returned, she was ready for me to clean the wound. She didn't make a sound as I worked. "Hand me my knife," she said next. "You want me to stitch this?" I asked, horrified. "If you don't, I could go into shock." "I'll guide you," she replied firmly. I threaded the needle, trying to ignore my fear. She bit down on the knife handle as I stitched her up, gasping occasionally. I finished as quickly as I could. "Not bad for a first-timer," she muttered before fainting. Panicked, I checked her breathing and propped her up. She came to after a few minutes. "I just need to sleep," she whispered, drifting off. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed beside her and fell asleep instantly. December 29th. Morning light filled the room as I woke up, embarrassed to find my arm around Esther's waist. Carefully, I pulled away, not wanting to wake her or give the wrong impression. Slipping on my shoes, I grabbed my wallet and keys and went out to find some breakfast. Luckily, there was a fast food spot near last night's pharmacy. I picked up breakfast sandwiches and coffee. When I returned, Esther was awake and asked me to change her bandage. The bleeding had stopped and there was no sign of infection. I helped her put on her sweater, making sure to be gentle and respectful. We both quickly devoured the food, sipping our coffee in silence. Then she gave me a curious look. "I didn't know Ginny had a tattoo," she said. "She doesn't," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "When I got up last night, I saw your wallet open to her picture. Looked like a tattoo on her neck." My mood darkened. "That's an old photo," I said flatly. "It's not a tattoo, it's a port wine stain." Her eyebrow raised. "Tell me more." "Ginny and I went to high school together. She was beautiful but self-conscious about the birthmark on her neck. Kids teased her relentlessly. One day, I stepped in to defend her. That's when our relationship started. We went to college together and eventually got married, but Ginny never believed she was truly beautiful. She always tried to cover that birthmark. A year ago, she decided to have laser treatments to remove it. After months of treatments, it was gone and her confidence soared. She began dressing more provocatively, drawing attention from other men. I wasn't happy, but she loved the admiration. When I voiced my concerns, she accused me of holding her back, so I stayed quiet. We can see how well that turned out. Esther studied me silently. I braced for her to criticize me for letting things spiral out of control. Instead, she simply said, "You're an interesting man, Thomas." Not what I expected. She stood up abruptly. "Let's hit the road. We've got a long drive ahead." Since her arm was still healing, I took the wheel. We crossed into Virginia quickly, but had another 8 hours of driving to go. As we traveled north on I-81, I asked, "So what's the story with the Al-Andalus virus? Why is it such a big deal?" She turned serious. "Our team has been working on it since we found it. Initially, we thought it was a data theft tool, but it doesn't do anything. It just runs briefly, then shuts down." "So what's the concern?" "3 reasons," she replied. "First, it's highly sophisticated. No one would put in this much effort for something trivial. Second, we've intercepted chatter among terror groups hinting at a major event. And third, you." "Me?" I was taken aback. "Yes. When we sent the virus to you, the noise level spiked and then went silent. Then 2 dangerous individuals came after you." "Emir and his brother," I muttered. "Exactly. Whatever Al-Andalus is, it's critical to their plan. We need to crack it." "So when we get back to DC, we head straight to Fort Meade?" I asked. "No, they might not let us in after what happened at Oak Ridge. It's safer if you work from home. You have secure NSA access, right?" I nodded. "Yes." "Then that's the plan." The idea of working from home was unappealing. I dreaded the thought of facing Ginny. It would only distract me from focusing on the virus. Despite trying to drive quickly, we were delayed by pit stops, lunch breaks, and Esther's worsening pain. I eventually pulled into Harrisonburg to find a pharmacy. The pharmacist, noticing Esther's condition, handed me a single Lortab tablet. "It should help until you get to a doctor," she said. Back in the car, Esther waited to take the pill until we stopped for dinner at a small burger joint in Front Royale. The medication made her drowsy, and it was clear we wouldn't make it back that night. I found a nearby Super 8 motel and helped her inside. She fell asleep minutes later. Alone in the dark room, the events of the past few days replayed in my mind. My life had been turned upside down, and Ginny's betrayal left me reeling. The anger bubbled up, and before I could think it through, I went outside and called her. She didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. "It's me, Ginny," I began, barely controlling my anger. "I know about your affair with Ymir. I heard what you said about him while you're with me. It made me sick. I can't believe you betrayed me after everything I've done for you, after all your talk about loyalty." I paused, taking a deep breath. "I'll be home tomorrow, and I don't want you there. Go to your boyfriend's, your parents, anywhere but here. The only time I want to see you again is in divorce court." I hung up, wishing I could slam an old-fashioned phone down to release some of my rage. I wandered the streets to cool off, then returned to the room. Esther was still asleep. I lay down beside her, reminded that I'd likely be sleeping alone for a long time. With that sad thought, I drifted off. December 30th. The motel breakfast was simple, but enough to get us going. Esther said her arm felt better, but I still drove. It took about an hour and a half to reach D.C., then we navigated through the Beltway. When we arrived in College Park, I noticed Ginny's car was gone. Looked like she had listened to my message. I circled the block and parked. The house was a mess, but I ignored it. I led Esther to the home office and booted up my computer. Just as I was about to log into the NSA network, I heard the front door key turn. "Damn it," I muttered, getting up. I told her not to come here. I opened the door to find Ginny, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Thomas," she cried. Before I could react, she was pushed into my arms and a man stepped out, holding a weapon. "What the?" I shouted, freezing at the sight of the weapon. Esther rushed forward, but stopped when he aimed at her. "Back off," he ordered, slamming the door shut with a smug grin. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Ymir," he sneered at me. "You must be the pathetic, betrayed man." He turned to Esther. "And the infamous Mossad agent, Esther Freeman." Esther tensed, ready to strike, but Ymir shifted the weapon to her. "Don't try it. One wrong move and we all go up," he said, revealing a vest of explosives under his jacket. "So, nerd boy," Ymir taunted, turning to my computer. "The password. Give it to me." "No," I replied, hoping to buy us some time. He laughed. "Let's see if I can change your mind. Maybe I'll start with her," he said, motioning toward Esther. Then he turned the weapon toward Ginny. "Or maybe I'll just mutilate her." Ginny screamed. Ymir's eyes locked on me. "Would you care if I liquidated her?" Damn it, I thought. Despite my anger at her, I couldn't let this happen. "Fine, don't hurt her. I'll give you the password." "Much better," he said, moving to the computer. "What is it?" I hesitated, my mind racing. I needed control of his hands. A risky idea came to me. If it failed, he'd likely eliminate me, but he might eliminate me anyway if he found out I hadn't cracked the virus. "It's not memorized," I lied. "I used the product code from that metal cube on the shelf," he sneered. "You really are a nerd." He picked up the small, flat silver cube. "That's only half," I added quickly. "The other half is on the second cube over there." I pointed to a wooden cabinet. Suspicious, he aimed the weapon at my chest. "Pick it up and show it, slowly." I grabbed the identical metal cube. "Want me to bring it to you?" "No," he snapped. "Put it on the floor and slide it over with your foot." Ginny was still crying, and Esther watched me intently. I knelt, placed the cube on the floor, and pushed it toward him with my shoe. "Back up, all of you," Ymir ordered. We moved against the wall. Ymir set his weapon down, kneeling to pick up the second cube, holding one in each hand. Suddenly, his hands slammed together with a loud crack. He screamed, dropping to his knees, trying to pull his hands apart. I charged, knocking him down. Esther was right behind me, kneeing him in the head twice. Ymir slumped, unconscious. "Got any tape?" she yelled. I grabbed duct tape, and we quickly bound his arms together, his fingers pinned between the metal cubes. Esther taped his legs and turned to me, confused. "What are those cubes?" she demanded. "Neodymium magnets," I admitted, blushing. "Super strong, with about 140 pounds of force. I bought them out of curiosity, but they scared me. This was the only way to keep him from setting off his vest." "No wonder he couldn't separate his hands," she muttered. Suddenly a loud thud echoed and the front door burst open. Men stormed in with attack rifles. "FBI down, hands in the air," one shouted. After confirming our identities, the agents removed Ymir's vest and disarmed it. "This would have blown up the entire house," one agent said. They cut the tape and separated Ymir's hands, which took 2 agents. Ymir woke, reaching for the vest trigger, only to realize it was gone. He slumped back and glared at us. "You think you've won, but it's too late." "Alandalis," he snarled. Then I heard a crack and smelled bitter almonds. "Damn! He took poison!" An agent yelled. The medic rushed over. Amyl nitrite now! But Ymir convulsed and stopped breathing within minutes. Cyanide! The medic cursed. A fake tooth! With Ymir dead, the agents turned to Ginny. Are you Virginia Selfridge? One asked. She nodded, and the agent said, You're under arrest as an accessory to liquidation and terrorism. He read her rights as she gasped and protested. No, I didn't know he was a terrorist, she cried. The agent ignored her, cuffing her. She turned to me, desperate. Thomas, help me! I didn't know! I felt a grim satisfaction. Sorry, Ginny. You did this to yourself. As they led her away, I asked another agent, Are they really charging her? He shrugged. No, she's just guilty of stupidity. We'll interrogate her for any info on Ymir's network. Feeling some closure, I approached Esther, who was having her arm checked by a medic. It'll be sore, but it's fine. Though I'd sue whoever stitched you up, the medic said, smirking. Esther smiled and touched my hand. I'll think about it, she replied. Turning serious, she approached the agent in charge. I need an escort to Fort Meade. We need to tackle Al-Andalus now. When we arrived at NSA headquarters, armed guards led us straight to the director's office. Inside, top officials from the NSA, FBI, and CIA gathered. We shared our intel, and they added theirs, concluding that a major attack, codenamed Al-Andalus, was imminent, likely aimed at Israel on New Year's Eve. The meeting devolved into arguments, so Esther and I stepped out for a moment. When we returned, she looked intense. I've been ordered by Mossad to stay with you, she said. Before I could react, the NSA director turned to me. Mr. Selfridge, you've been working on the Al-Andalus virus, and the terrorists targeted you for a reason. I want you to assemble a team to crack this code. You'll have full NSA resources. He nodded at Esther. Mossad wants Miss Freeman on your team. Is that correct, Miss Freeman? She nodded. The director stood up. You two focus on the virus. Time is short. An escort led us to a secure work area, pointing out the computer terminals and phone stations. Look, Esther pointed out. It's 5:30 p.m. here, but it's already New Year's Eve in Israel. If the attack is planned for midnight, time is running out. I sat at a terminal, running different applications to crack the virus, but nothing worked. December 31st. I woke to Esther shaking me. It was 6 a.m. in Washington, 1 p.m. in Tel Aviv. We heard explosions from a TV monitor, fireworks in New Zealand. It's midnight in Auckland, I muttered. Time's running out. The code didn't make sense. We need a different approach, I said. Let's figure out the terrorists' goal. She nodded. Our intel suggests something on the scale of 9/11ths. If I were them, I'd target Israel's Negev nuclear site, I said, dreading the thought. She paled. If they destroyed it, Israel could become another Chernobyl. I stared at the screens showing fireworks in Sydney. Suddenly it hit me. The Patriots, I yelled. The virus targets the Patriot missile system. I rushed to the door. Get someone from the Patriot manufacturer here, now! Minutes later, a man from Raytheon entered. I explained our theory and showed him the virus code. His face grew serious. This code targets the Patriot AN/MPQ-65 radar, altering the intercept data so missiles miss their target. I turned to Esther. Tell the IDF the virus targets the Patriots. She made the call, her expression darkening. The IDF found traces of the virus in one Patriot system. The Raytheon tech added, If one's infected, they all are. They're networked. How do we fix it? I asked. You need to replace the radar units, which takes hours, he replied. That's too long, I said. We need another solution. After hours of effort, an engineer finally said, Your best bet is to destroy the missiles on the ground before launch, then swap out the systems. Esther snapped. We've tried that before and failed. Find another way. As everyone returned to work, Esther pointed to the live feed from Tel Aviv. It's midnight, she whispered. Everyone froze, watching the screens nervously. Esther leaned over. The IDF is on full alert, and I've been told that your military is also at a high state of readiness. The scene in Tel Aviv showed nothing unusual, just typical New Year's Eve celebrations. Esther let out a breath of relief as she reported that Dimona was quiet. The Raytheon team wanted to call it a night, but Esther insisted they keep working. There's too much at stake, she said, and they reluctantly continued. After a while, one of the engineers asked, Does anyone know what 1.492 signifies? I shook my head. Not that I can think of. Why? That's the deviation the virus introduces into the targeting data. It's such a precise number. I thought it might mean something. Another tech chimed in. 1492, that's the year, and started singing. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Everyone laughed except Esther, who suddenly looked serious. She hurried to a computer and checked something. "That's it," she yelled. We stared at her, confused, so she explained. Most people know that in 1492, Columbus set sail. But in that same year, the last emir of Granada surrendered to Queen Isabella, ending Al-Andalus. Then her face went pale as she typed furiously. The emir surrendered on January 2nd. The attack was never planned for New Year's Eve. It's set for tomorrow. They want to strike on the anniversary of that defeat. The Raytheon engineers exchanged puzzled looks, but it made sense to me. Esther immediately called Tel Aviv, and I rushed to brief the director. After hearing our theory, he nodded. They never forget old grudges. A coup on that anniversary would be their dream. He paused, then said, "Now, your team has to find a way to stop it." When I returned to the workroom, the Raytheon team had linked to a test version of the Patriot guidance system in Andover. For hours, we tried to root out the virus, but the system wasn't built to handle an internal threat. "It's like an epidemic," one tech groaned. "It's everywhere." January 1st, New Year's Day in Israel passed quietly, confirming Esther's prediction. But it only meant we were that much closer to the real attack. The head of the Raytheon team finally approached me. "We've narrowed it down to two options. First, shut down the infected units, wipe all software, and reload with a clean version. But it's time-consuming, and there's no guarantee we won't reinfect them." I shook my head, turning to Esther. "That might take too long, and we can't risk taking Damona's defenses offline for that long. What if the attack comes early?" She nodded, looking defeated. "Is there anything else?" I asked the engineers. The lead tech hesitated. "We could try to write an error-checking routine, but the system was never designed for this. We don't have a way to stop this virus." Suddenly, a thought struck me. "Smallpox," I blurted out. He looked puzzled. "What? You fight smallpox with cowpox?" "Maybe we can't eliminate this virus, but what if we introduce a second virus to counteract it?" They looked at me skeptically. "The virus skews the targeting data by 1.492 degrees. What if we write a new virus to adjust the targeting by minus 1.492 degrees? They could cancel each other out." The engineers debated the idea. Then the head turned to me. "Some of us think it might work, but others worry it could cause a bigger issue. We can't even be sure the system will accept a second infection." "Look, we know the current virus is highly contagious," I argued. "If we create a duplicate with reverse values, it should balance out. What other option do we have?" After more discussion, they grudgingly agreed. They started creating the antivirus, double-checking everything to match the original except for the altered target values. While they worked, Esther grabbed my arm, concern in her eyes. "Are you sure about this? If it fails—" I met her gaze, filled with both determination and doubt. Memories of standing up for what I believed in flashed through my mind. "It's the right move," I said firmly. "I believe in this." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I trust you." The next few hours flew by. The team checked and rechecked the antivirus, while others coordinated with technicians in Israel to prepare for the system reinfection and tests. As midnight in Tel Aviv approached, Esther and I sat through endless meetings with skeptics. Finally, we ended up back in the director's office where, after a heated debate, he addressed his counterparts. "Unless someone has a better solution in the next hour," he said, "it's time to act." With no other options, the director turned to us. "You've come this far. See it through." He led us to the roof where a helicopter was waiting. We boarded and headed to the Pentagon. After landing, we were escorted deep into its command center. Inside, high-ranking officials sat around an oval table facing a large screen. Esther and I took seats against the wall. Soon, the lights dimmed and the screen lit up with a satellite view of the Middle East. 2 clocks showed the time in Washington and Tel Aviv. "It's almost midnight in Israel," Esther whispered. The screen zoomed in further until it showed the lights of a small desert town labeled Dimona, with a highway running by it. "Too close," said a voice. The view then zoomed out, revealing the coast of the Mediterranean to the northwest and a dark area to the east. "That's the Dead Sea," Esther whispered, pointing. "A little further, please," the voice directed. Soon, the whole of Israel and parts of its neighboring countries were visible. "We're approaching 0 hour," the voice announced. Esther squeezed my hand tightly, reminding me that this wasn't just a simulation. Real lives were at stake. "Watch the north and northeast," she whispered. "That's where the attack will likely come from." "Syria and Iraq?" I asked. She nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. The room was silent as the seconds ticked down to midnight. There was an audible gasp when the clock hit 24:00, but nothing happened at first. Some people murmured quietly. "Told you so," someone muttered. Then Esther's nails dug into my hand. "There!" she exclaimed, pointing at tiny orange-red arrows rising from the desert north of Israel. More arrows soon followed, arcing southward. "Holy crap!" someone blurted out. "There are over 24 of them, likely Scuds," another voice speculated. The arrows moved past Jerusalem, heading toward the marked target, Dimona. It felt like watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Suddenly, bright flashes appeared around Dimona, and new arrows of light shot into the air. Time seemed to slow as the incoming missiles continued their path. I was convinced we had failed. Then, a large yellow explosion bloomed in the sky over Dimona, followed by more fiery bursts that eventually dissipated. Esther threw her arms around me, kissing me. "You did it! You did it!" she cried. As I hugged her, I heard cheers erupt in the room. "Situation report from Dimona," a voice called out. "One missile got through," someone reported. "It went off course and hit south of the town. Only minor damage." More cheers filled the room. I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time. Before I could react, a new set of launches appeared on the screen, this time from within Israel. "What's happening?" I asked, confused. Esther was focused on the screen. "Those are Delilah's," she explained. "Ground-launched cruise missiles. Our radar tracked the Scuds, and now we're returning fire." She turned to me, her expression fierce. "Did you think we wouldn't strike back?" As I watched the lights streaking north and east, I realized there were no defenses to stop them. I looked away and sat in silence, observing the room's celebrations. Soon, Esther was called for a phone call, and I felt out of place. An MP approached me. "Sir, the NSA director will be here for a while. He's offered the helicopter to take you and Miss Freeman wherever you need to go." Esther returned, and we followed our escort to the helipad. She seemed unusually quiet. When we boarded, she leaned toward the pilot. "Can you take me to Dulles International Airport?" she asked. "What's going on?" I asked. She sighed. "It's an eye for an eye. The counterstrike was just part of the response. I've been called back to Tel Aviv." "Oh," I said, disappointed. "I thought maybe—" She smiled, squeezing my hand. "I would have liked to celebrate, but we don't always get to choose." The helicopter quickly covered the distance to Dulles. Esther turned to me before getting out. "You've surprised me in many ways, Thomas Selfridge. I won't forget you." She kissed me quickly and left before I could say anything. On the way back to College Park, I felt like I was in a daze. Everything from the past week felt surreal, like scenes from a movie. Once home, I had to enter through the side door because the front was covered with plywood. The living room was still in disarray. "Guess it wasn't a dream," I muttered to myself. I found some food in the fridge and returned to the living room. I righted an overturned chair and sat down, feeling a wave of exhaustion. Looking at the clock, I realized it was almost midnight. "Damn," I muttered. My break was over, and I had work tomorrow. I went to the bedroom surrounded by reminders of Ginny, her clothes, photos, and the furniture she had chosen. I couldn't help but wonder if she and Ymir had ever... I couldn't take it. I grabbed a blanket and slept on the couch. January 2nd. The couch was uncomfortable, so I woke up early. I was eager to read what the Washington Post had to say about the attack. I didn't expect my name to be mentioned, but I thought there might be something about the antivirus effort. Surprisingly, there was nothing on the front page. I went through the paper, but there wasn't a word about it. How do you keep something like that secret? I wondered. At work, everything seemed normal. My coworkers had no clue what had happened. "How was your holiday?" they asked. "It was eventful," I replied casually. A few hours later, I was summoned to see Ben's boss. I walked in, expecting praise, but instead was met with a stern look. He held up a document with my signature. "When you joined the NSA, you agreed to keep any information gathered here confidential," he stated coldly. "Under Section 18 of the U.S. Legal Code, disclosing anything about codes or ciphers of the U.S. or foreign governments, or details related to them, can result in a fine or imprisonment for up to 10 years. This includes everything you saw and did yesterday. Understood?" "Yes, sir," I nodded. "Good. Now get back to work." I left his office, feeling deflated. I didn't want a medal, but a bit of gratitude would have been nice. It was clear someone had buried the whole affair. I wasn't going to get any recognition for my role. Instead, I felt like I'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The depression returned as I began the unpleasant task of searching for a divorce attorney. Over the next weeks, things didn't get better. I learned of Agent Henry's end of life through a small article in the Knoxville News-Sentinel. He died in a traffic accident at Frozen Head State Park. He deserved more than this, I thought, frustrated at the lack of recognition. A coworker later mentioned that our boss's boss was being promoted, supposedly due to a coup over the holidays. I fumed inside, knowing he had merely used me as bait. I considered going to the NSA director, but got sidetracked by a political uproar over Israel's actions in Syria. As Congress debated, the NSA director resigned, and a new one took over. My attempts to divorce Ginny hit roadblocks. Maryland wasn't a no-fault state, and proving infidelity would involve classified information. There's no simple way out, I thought, feeling more trapped than ever. So I did what I had to do, but it frustrated me to no end that I had to wait so long to be free of her. I was also unhappy about paying Ginny temporary spousal support. After what she had done, it felt incredibly unfair, but my hands were tied. As winter turned into spring, my mood worsened. I felt increasingly isolated at both work and home. My job brought no satisfaction. The one significant achievement I had made was now a secret, something nobody could acknowledge. Management seemed to disapprove of me, and my coworkers started avoiding me. Outside work, it wasn't much better. Most of our friends were couples, used to socializing in pairs. Now I was the odd man out, and since no one really knew why Ginny and I had split, I think some assumed it was my fault. So I spent a lot of time brooding. It felt like every time I tried to do the right thing, I was punished. I had tried to take care of Ginny. I didn't expect to be worshipped for it, but a little loyalty would have been nice. And when I got caught up in the terror plot, I thought I responded well. I didn't want a medal, but some acknowledgement would have been appreciated. I began to feel used. Ginny had certainly used me, wanting my support while she got her laser treatments. Maybe she had loved me once, but that disappeared fast when her birthmark was gone and she started getting attention from other men. Work was no different. My boss humiliated me with news of Ginny's affair, used me as bait for the terrorists, and then got all the credit. And hadn't Esther used me too? All she really wanted was my help solving the Alan Dulles puzzle. Once she got it, she flew home without so much as a proper goodbye. I knew that wasn't entirely fair. Esther had saved my life and put herself in danger to do so. Still, she wouldn't have done that if she didn't think I could help. I was tired of being used. Tired of a marriage with a cheating wife and a job where I wasn't valued. I felt an urge to get away, to leave everything behind and start over somewhere far away where no one had any claims on me. For once, I wanted to put myself first. I'd spent too much time doing things for others. Now it was time to do something for me. The old me would have been horrified. Don't do anything rash, I'd have told myself. You have responsibilities. Well, screw that, I muttered. The few times I'd made big, impulsive decisions in my life, they'd worked out just fine, even if no one else would ever know it. Now, I was going to make another big decision that felt right for me. If others didn't like it, too bad. December 31st, the next year. Cheers erupted in the bar as we watched fireworks explode over Auckland Harbor Bridge. I smiled. It looked just like the scene on the NSA screen a year ago. I had a lot to celebrate. I had left everything behind except my computer, a few personal items, and a bag of clothes. I bought a one-way ticket to Auckland, New Zealand. I chose Auckland for 3 reasons. It was as far away as I could get while still speaking English. I didn't know a soul there and had no obligations. And yes, I was blown away by the scenery in the Lord of the Rings movies. Once again, my decision turned out well. The people in New Zealand were incredibly friendly and welcoming, so I didn't feel as lonely as I'd expected. I found a job quickly. I had enough money to tide me over, but I landed a good position almost immediately. The ANZ banking group had experienced a cybersecurity scare just before I arrived, so my expertise in viruses and malware made me a valuable hire. After starting work, I rented a small 2-bedroom flat and began building my new life. Untangling things back in Maryland was challenging. Breaking away from an old life isn't easy, but I managed. I quit my job, transferred my thrift savings plan, paid my bills, and took care of immediate concerns. I gave my lawyer power of attorney to handle the biggest issue, Ginny. I told him she could keep the house in place of alimony and left the rest to him. The problem was that Ginny refused to accept the situation. She dragged out the divorce process, refusing to cooperate. I instructed my attorney not to reveal my whereabouts. She began to maltreat him, which, of course, added to my legal fees. Finally, I realized I had to speak to her directly. I arranged a Skype call, not telling her that I had to wake up before dawn to do it. That certainly didn't help my mood. New Zealand is literally at the end of the internet cables, so connections can be unreliable. But somehow we got a stable link for our call. Seeing her face on the screen was a shock. She still looked as beautiful as when I first fell in love with her. This won't be easy, I thought. The call didn't start well. She demanded to know where I was, and when I refused to tell her, she switched between anger and tears. "Why did you run away?" she sobbed. "Why won't you tell me where you are?" I sighed. "Honestly, Ginny, you broke my heart. I couldn't bear to be around all the reminders of you. I had to get as far away as possible." To my surprise, she smiled. "That means you still have feelings for me. Why not stop this nonsense and come back?" I tried to stay calm. "Ginny, you cheated. You broke our vows. How can I come back after that?" Her face fell, but then she looked determined. "I know, and I feel terrible about it, but I was vulnerable." "Why?" I pressed. "Why were you vulnerable?" She shook her head as if I was clueless. I had just finished my last laser treatment and was adjusting to my new look. He came along and called me beautiful. Of course I responded. That infuriated me. "But I always told you you were beautiful," I said, "since the first day I met you." "Yes, but you said that before I got my birthmark removed." He had never seen me before, so his compliments meant more, she replied cheerfully. I was too stunned to respond, but my expression must have given away my feelings, because her tone changed, and she looked upset. "I don't want to talk about that," she sniffled. "I've been so lonely without you. I cry every day. I know what I did was awful, and I've kicked myself for being so stupid." She paused to wipe her eyes. "But it wasn't my fault. I didn't know Emir was a trained spy. He was just a handsome guy with sweet words. I got swept up. I didn't realize he was only using me to get to you." She continued hurriedly. "I've learned so much from this. I know I'd be a better wife if you'd just come back. We can be happy again. What do you think, honey?" I watched her as she spoke. She looked and sounded the same as always. But something had changed. I no longer loved her. "Ginny," I said, "I've listened to everything you've said. But two things are missing. You've made it clear what you want and how you feel. But you haven't once asked about my feelings." "Well, of course, I care how you feel," she interrupted. "I know you were hurt, and I'll spend every day making it up to you if we get back together." I held up my hand, stopping her. "There's something else. You never once said, 'I love you.'" She gasped. "Of course I love you. That's a given. I've always loved you." "No, Ginny," I said. "Love isn't a given. It's not just words. It's shown through actions by what you do and don't do. And you don't show love by cheating just because someone feeds you compliments. I'm sorry, Ginny, but this call has only confirmed that we're done. Goodbye." I ended the call, leaving her tear-stained face frozen on the screen. It hurt to lose someone who once meant so much to me. But I knew I'd made the right choice. December 31st, 2 years later. Earlier in the evening, I had been at a party with friends, but it felt right to spend the New Year's countdown at the bar where I'd first celebrated in New Zealand. The patrons had welcomed me back then, and I felt at home as I raised a pint and watched the fireworks over Auckland Harbor. The past 2 years had treated me well. Ginny finally accepted the divorce, and I gave her the house in exchange for ending spousal support. Now I was legally free. My career took off too. After a year at the bank, I built a reputation as a cybersecurity expert and started consulting on my own. Luck struck again when the National Cybersecurity Center in Wellington reached out for my help, giving me credibility and boosting my business. It also pushed through my permanent residency application, making me an official Kiwi. With the income from my consulting work, I bought a home with a view of Auckland Harbor. I was glad I had taken the leap. The bar dimmed for the fireworks, and at first I didn't recognize the woman behind me. Then she spoke. "Happy New Year, Thomas Selfridge." Her accent was one I hadn't heard in years. I turned and hugged her without hesitation. "Happy New Year, Esther." After a moment, we stepped back. She was as fit as I remembered, in a sleeveless black sweater and tight jeans. I noticed a thin scar on her right shoulder, and this time her dark hair was tucked under a baseball cap. When she tilted her head to watch an explosion over the harbor, I saw the black patch covering her right eye. The bar crowd grew louder, so I leaned in and asked, "Want to go somewhere quieter to catch up?" She smiled. "I'd like that." We drove to my house in Herne Bay. When we pulled into the driveway, she whistled softly. "You're doing well, Thomas. I'm glad." I poured us a drink and led her to the deck. We had a view of the harbor and the distant fireworks. Despite the sea breeze, it was warm. Even after 3 years, it still felt odd to celebrate New Year's in summer. After a while, she took off her cap and turned to me. "Aren't you going to ask about my eye?" I noticed a scar running from under the patch, across her eyebrow, and into her olive skin. "What happened?" I asked. She put the cap back on and sat in a deck chair. "It was my fault. I found one of the terror leaders behind Al-Andalus. Unfortunately, I didn't find his hidden knife until it was too late." She grinned. "But he won't be plotting anything else." I could believe she'd take a wound like that and still win. "Couldn't the doctors?" I gestured to the patch. She shook her head. "The damage was too severe, and by the time I got to a hospital, it was 18 hours later. It was too late." Sensing it was time for a change of subject, I asked, "Are you still with Mossad?" Her expression told me I'd made a mistake. "They kicked me out," she said bitterly. "With this face, I could never go undercover again, and my marksmanship is ruined. They offered me a desk job, but I refused." I felt her pain and stayed silent. Then she added, "The last few years have been hard. I had a lover in Tel Aviv, and we talked about a future together. But after my injury, he couldn't even look at me. He wasn't the man I thought he was." Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was still hurting. I pulled up a chair beside her, putting my arm around her shoulder. We sat quietly, gazing at the city and harbor. Finally, I asked the question that had been on my mind. "How did you find me in New Zealand?" She gave a small smile. "I called in a few favors. You did a good job of disappearing." "At the time, I needed to get away from my old life," I admitted. "But I've made a new life here, and now it feels like home." I looked at her. "Why did you track me down?" Her face grew thoughtful. "You surprised me, Thomas. I thought you were just a computer nerd, but you handled things that would break most people. I regretted not getting to know you better." She paused, staring out at the water. "The time we spent together, despite the danger, was better than anything since. I missed it. And I missed you." She turned toward me. "Besides," she said, her voice husky, "we never got to celebrate." Suddenly, she pulled me into a passionate kiss. We stood up, clinging to each other, and I led her inside to my bedroom. It took us 3 attempts to quench the flames. I woke the next morning to the soft light of dawn. Esther was snuggled against me, and I smiled, recalling our night. As I moved, I noticed her eye patch had fallen off. I picked it up just as she woke. "Give it back!" she cried, snatching the patch from my hand. "Don't look at me," she pleaded, turning away and trying to put it back on. Once it was secure, she bent over, sobbing into her hands. I put my arm around her, letting her cry. Feeling her shudder, a surge of emotions swept over me. This woman saved my life, I thought, and now I can save hers. And I realized that this was exactly what I wanted. For both of us. I gently turned her to face me and removed the patch. "No," she whimpered. "I'm so ugly." "You're wrong," I said softly. "You see only the scar. I see a beautiful, strong woman." She looked at me, disbelief slowly turning into hope. Then she threw her arms around me and kissed me. I knew right then that I had made another good choice.